Hello everyone, welcome to the first tutorials on cursive lowercase letters. This series of tutorials is designed for anyone who would like to improve their everyday handwriting. Today I'm going through the 5 short letters A, C, E, O, and I. Instead of going through alphabetic order, I'm grouping letters by similarities so you can see the common patterns and hopefully make progress faster. In case you're wondering what tools I'm using, I already made a video dedicated to this topic, in which I discuss how to choose pencil, pencil lead, paper, and so on. Feel free to check out my video here. I'll put a link in the description below. Before you start practicing, I strongly suggest that you do 3 to 5 minutes of muscular movement exercise just to warm up your hand, and you can find the details in my playlist here. Now let's take a look at lowercase o. First, you need to find the baseline and the x height, and the lowercase o will occupy the space between the two lines. Start at some place slightly below the x height, move your pen counterclockwise to complete the oval. Make sure your letter is sitting securely on the main slant. To double check your letter form, simply draw 2 tangent lines that are parallel to the main slant, and the main slant should divide the space between the 2 tangent lines by half. To create line variation, you need to learn how to control your pressure. When you move down to the baseline, you should apply heavier pressure. When you move up to the x height, you should apply lighter pressure. This is a common pattern among all letters, and you should easily recognize it in other letters in this video. Now let's look at some common mistakes. The reason you should start slightly beneath the x height is that it makes it easier to complete the loop. If you start on the x height, you might end up with a very pointy O, which doesn't look very elegant. Another common mistake is to make the letter too fat, which may attract too much attention in a sentence or paragraph. On the other hand, you don't want the letter to be too thin, which can look weak and sloppy. A third mistake you should try to avoid is not following the slant. Remember to check your letter periodically to ensure that it's sitting securely on the main slant. By the way, if you're confused about the terminology I'm using, such as baseline and x height, please check out my video on handwriting theory and letter anatomy. To write letter A, first find the x height and the baseline. The letter A is similar to O, except that it has an extra downstroke which ends at the baseline and turns into an exit stroke. To check your letter has the correct slant, you need to first check the oval is sitting on the main slant, and then the downstroke is also sitting on the main slant. Now let's examine the pressure variation of lowercase a. As I mentioned earlier, downstroke generally needs heavier pressure. So when you move your pen downwards to meet the baseline, you should apply heavier pressure. And when you move upwards away from the baseline, you should reduce pressure. One of the common mistakes is to turn the downstroke into an arc. This can cause your letter to disintegrate and look very sloppy. Another mistake is to transition too fast from the downstroke to the exit stroke, which can cause your letter to look very pointy and unnatural. Also, I don't recommend that you start the letter on the x height, because it will make it very hard to complete a full oval, and the oval will look deflated and you might end up with a very pointy top. If you start somewhere beneath the x height and you start the letter by moving first upwards to meet the x height, you will end up with a much fuller oval. The lowercase c looks kind of like lowercase o, with part of which taken away, but here are a few nuances you need to pay attention to. One is that the exit stroke is no longer completing the oval, but somewhat tapered, and it connects directly to the next letter. Also, if you extend the entry and exit stroke, you should see that the 2 arcs are approximately parallel. Another small detail you can't ignore is the small hook on top of the letter. This is the distinguishing characteristic of lowercase c, without which the letter would be very hard to recognize in a word or sentence. For example here, without the hook, the lowercase c looks just like the lower part of lowercase I. And if you're writing quickly, you might even forget to put a dot on the lowercase I, which will make the two letters almost impossible to distinguish. The lowercase I is probably the easiest letter. It has an entry stroke, a downstroke, an exit stroke, and a dot, which is placed at about half or 2/3 of a space above the X height. Now let's look at how to control pressure. As I mentioned earlier, the downstroke will be heavy and the upstroke will be light. So you would have a light entry stroke, a heavy downstroke, a light exit stroke, which is followed by a dot. As long as you make sure that the downstroke is on the main slant, it's almost impossible to make any mistake. Finally, the lowercase e is similar to c, except that the entry stroke will cross the main slant much earlier, and this is how you create a loop at the top. If you extend the entry stroke and the exit stroke, the two arcs should be parallel. A very common mistake is not to cross the main slant, and this will result in a very skinny and almost upright loop, which makes the letter very difficult to read. This is a demonstration of the writing scale. In this video, I'm writing at a very large demo scale which has an 8mm X height. When you practice, you should be writing at half as tall with a 4mm X height, and you can find the practice sheet in the description below. After you have learned all the lowercase and uppercase letters, then you may transition to even smaller, practical scale. And this is the scale you can use for your everyday handwriting, bullet journaling, note-taking, and so on. Thank you very much for watching till the end. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumb up and subscribe for more tutorials. In the next video, we will start looking at more difficult letters.